Dean, anybody trickling in? All right, we're going to get started. For those of you that are still looking for a seat, there's still, again, plenty of room up front, table number 1. Good evening. My name is Jeff Retzloff. I'm the Community Development Director for the Village of Germantown. With me this evening is Emily Zant, our Associate Planner. We're going to be your hosts tonight, the Hollywood tour bus drivers, if you will. We'll be guiding you through some information and pointing out a few things along the way, and we break up the evening with some activities. With that, I'd like to introduce Dean Walter, our Village President and Plan Commission Chairman.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, it's great to see everyone here tonight. Just about every table's got people sitting at it. Thank you for spending your time with us and for your interest in this particular topic of the 2050 plan and what we're proposing versus what you'd like to see in the different areas. Your input is important to us, and your interaction is also important as we move this forward. You know, we had started it almost 2 years ago. COVID put it on a little bit of a back burner, kind of a hiatus. We tried to do what we could within the restrictions of COVID and at least try to keep it alive and moving. But with with the way things have changed now, we can get this back on track and have more meetings like this, and hopefully have a lot of your input so that it can help us guide to the next step of what you'd like Germantown to be and what our land use plan will be going into 2050. So once again, thank you all for coming and for spending your time and for caring enough to give us your input.
Thank you, Dean. So to the purpose for our workshop this evening, for a community with greater than 50% of our total land area, undeveloped open space, farmland, cropland, pasture land, woodland, it's fair to say that the preservation of these rural areas is a critical component of our planning effort and a very important part of what the village is and wants to continue to be. The focus tonight is on the topic of rural preservation, and more specifically, how staff is proposing to address one critical issue affecting our rural areas, and that is how to deal with the issue and the pressure of future development. Our format tonight is an informational setting, a group format. The idea is to help generate some discussion amongst our participants. Our WebEx participants are also able to participate. Certainly can't communicate necessarily with those at the table, but are able to participate in some of our activities as we work through the evening. I would like to point out that at a few points along the way this evening, we're going to be using our Mentimeter live polling system. I think Emily's been walking around trying to help people get a jump on setting up your phone, mobile device. It's a method by which we're going to ask some questions, get some live feedback. You participate by way of entering in your responses on your mobile device, and we'll see in real time the responses on the screen and what the answers and actions and opinions are as we move forward. And we'll get to that in a little bit as far as setting up. As far as the rest of the evening, I'm going to go over some planned 2050 plan project background and the status. We're going to discuss a little bit about the public participation and engagement activities that have been held to date and what some of the reaction has been. I'm going to briefly address the issue of farmland protection and rural preservation, or as a component of rural preservation. I'm going to cover and do a little bit of a comparison between the current 2020 plan and the 2050 plan, at least the approaches that we're proposing at this point as they apply to the topic of rural preservation. I'm going to go over how we came to develop the Rural Preservation District, the boundary, and the basic development policies that we're going to be talking about tonight. And finally, we're going to go into some detail, have a little exercise concerning conservation subdivision, conservation design as a method of laying out future development. This is a concept that's in both the 2020 and the 2050 plan, and it's worthy to share information in detail about. And finally, we'll wrap things up. So let's get on to the Mentimeter, the live polling system. Again, instantaneous results for everybody to see. It does require a Wi-Fi compatible device. 2 steps. We need to get you onto the village Wi-Fi system. And is anybody having trouble? All right. Please feel free to ask some of your neighbors, or we'll have Emily try and walk around to help you get set up. But basically 2 steps. We want to get you onto the village Wi-Fi system. The name of it is the VGT Guest, and the password to get into it and connect onto the internet is VGT Guest. As shown on the screen, as included on the information at your desk. And then the second step would be to get to the Mentimeter or the menti.com website. That you can actually get to by way of 2 ways. You can key in the information into your web browser, that being the www.menti.com web address, and then you'd enter a code 4318-7827, or the easiest approach would be to take and use your QR code reader app on your phone. Again, anybody having any problems, please raise your hand and we'll walk you through that. We use this system with our kickoff meeting, and we found it to be quite successful. People seem to enjoy getting some instant feedback on the questions that were being asked at the time. Those of you in the overflow room, the conference room A, table number 11, unfortunately, we don't have a speaker that reaches in there, so we'll talk as loud as we can. You can hear us, excellent, but you do have the TV screen, so you can see what everyone else is seeing as well. Everybody okay, set up? I would point out that for those who are not interested in participating in the Mentimeter system, we do have hard copies of the questions that are being asked this evening. I believe some copies were left on the table that you can fill out and answer the questions in a hard copy form, and leave those with us before you leave. Emily, are we good? Does anybody need a copy of the hard copy of the questions? All right, then we're gonna jump into our first activity, a get to know you activity, basically using Mentimeter, and Emily is going to walk us through that process.
So our first questions this evening are just kind of get to know you questions. We'll find out who's in the room. Where do you live or own property? If you don't live within Germantown, there's Richfield, Jackson, Mequon, and Menominee Falls. So you should be able to place a dot on the map in an approximate area. Just touch it with your finger.
So it looks like we've got folks participating from all over the village.
Great.
That's great.
Okay. Still a few coming in here. Okay, we'll go to the next question. How long have you lived or owned property in Germantown? The options are less than a year, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 15, 16 to 25, and more than 25 years.
Yep.
Excellent. Next one. If you own or take care of property in Germantown, how many acres of land do you own or manage? Less than an acre, 1 to 4 acres. Right here. 5 to 10, 11 to 35, or more than 35 acres. Okay, we have all over the board there, too. Excellent. Okay, how old are you? It says anonymous.
Yes, feel free to pick whatever category you want. There is no wrong answer.
All right. And the last question for this section of polling, in 1 or 2 words, what do you think of when you hear rural preservation?
Now you can enter up to 5 answers, I believe.
I think we did 6 actually.
6,
So.
okay.
But you don't have to. Just 1 or 2 is great. So you can see some of the most common answers are farm, farmland, quiet, open, green space. Good. Okay.
All right. We're going to move on. I need to cover a few items about our 2050 comprehensive planning process in the project. And as my slides come up on the screen, hopefully, I just want to point out that back in 1999, Wisconsin adopted Act 9, the Smart Growth Law. It requires all local governments got an issue. Requires all municipalities to adopt a smart growth plan, and when they're making decisions after January 1 of 2010, those decisions should be consistent with their comprehensive plan. There are 9 basic elements that were required in a smart growth comprehensive plan, according to the state statutes. And over time, the smart growth reality has changed versus what was originally envisioned under the law. Some would argue that the smart growth movement has moved on a bit or just has changed terminology. There has been many legislative attempts since 2010 to effectively water down or eliminate the comprehensive plan requirements. Only about 80% of the counties, cities, and villages and towns in the state have an adopted smart growth comprehensive plan. Of those, only 28% have updated their original plan, and the updates range in for updates occurring within 8 to 10 years, about a third of the plans, and the balance, about 2/3 of the plans that have been updated, the average time to update them has just been just under 19 years. So the village of Germantown, unfortunately, is not much different than that last group. Our 2020 Smart Growth Plan is our first and only smart growth plan adopted pursuant to the comprehensive planning statutes. It was a 3-year effort from the fall of 2001 through 2004. And at that time, the consultant, JJR consultant out of Chicago, was hired by the village to help prepare that particular plan. As time has evolved, and certainly given my time here, the one component, one of the 9 elements that has been the most important, the most critical, and certainly the most discussed and talked about is the future land use plan element, comprised of the plan itself, a plan map, and a series of development policies spelled out in the plan. On screen is a copy of the land use plan map and the categories associated with that. The current project, the 2050 Comprehensive Plan project, is intended to be an update of the 2020 plan and not a major overhaul. We're not starting from scratch. We're picking up and updating some facts and figures and terminology, and as we see fit, we're also updating policies that we feel are necessary in order to keep the village on track with its goals and vision. We have hired Grafe out of Milwaukee to assist us, the consulting firm. They are not here this evening in person. I believe they're observing on WebEx. They took the training wheels off and let Emily and I take a shot at tonight's workshop. So we're doing the workshop this evening. They will be joining us for another workshop on May 23rd. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. They are going to guide us through the process of adopting a smart growth compliant plan. They have to date so far helped us adopt a variety of things, including our public participation plan that's comprised of the various in-person and virtual meetings, hearings, workshops, and events, our social media and website, and also our community surveying process. As Dean alluded to, we hit a snag. Like everyone else, our staff and our process was upended by COVID. Although we tried and were somewhat successful in switching to virtual meetings and contacts with our consultant and staff and the general public, the process was essentially derailed and we limped along for about 2 years. With the help of the village board and their aggressive goal setting for 2022, we have a new timeline. The goal is to complete the project by the end of July of this year. In the course of dealing with COVID, we revised our public participation options. As I mentioned, we switched to virtual and versus in person. And we did that. We had a virtual workshop for our public meeting, our second public meeting about a year ago. And more importantly, we added the Social Pinpoint Community Engagement website. As shown on the screen in the bottom, it's the Germantown2050.com website. It's an excellent tool. It's a engagement tool, a place-based, essentially tool that allows you to look at a map of the village and pull various icons representing different activities or issues, place them on a map somewhere, and tell us what you think about that particular feature or area or topic. And maybe more importantly, it allows other people to come there and look and see what others have said and commented on, and you have the opportunity to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whether you agree or disagree with that particular statement or comment. And if you haven't been there, I would encourage you to go there, if for no other reason than take a look at some of the comments that are provided so you have a sense of what your friends, neighbors, and other residents and property owners in the village think about various issues and topics and items throughout the village. Remaining activities for the project, we're going to be getting a draft document next month. The Plan Commission is going to be ultimately reviewing that, but first we're going to have our public meeting number 3 on May 23rd. It will be a consultant-led meeting, the format of which we haven't decided yet. Based in part on our success this evening, we'll decide what kind of format. But ultimately, the Plan Commission will review the draft plan, hopefully in June. We'll hold at least a joint public hearing with the Plan Commission and the Village Board of the draft plan. And as part of our public meeting number 4 in July, with ultimately having the village board consider and adopt the plan by the end of July or early August, depending upon how timetables work out. As I mentioned, public participation and engagement activities, as envisioned in our PPP, our public participation plan, we've had a number of activities so far. Public meeting number 1, an open house. We had 6 or 7 pop-up tent type events. We've been at the Taste of Germantown, National Night Out, Fire Department Safety Fair, Oktoberfest. We've had a presence, collected comments, and those items have been successful. We did a joint workshop with the Park Commission, having a park planning party back in November of 19 to help them out with their comprehensive outdoor recreation planning effort that ran on a parallel course with this project for a short while. We had our public meeting number 2, our virtual workshop, back in March of last year. And again, we've introduced the Germantown 2050 interactive mapping website, the social pinpoint site, if you will, that includes both the mapping, the place-based mapping, and a visual preference survey. One of the first activities that led our process off was our community survey that we conducted back in 2019, the end of 2019. We sent out by invitation a postcard, a 4x6 colorful postcard to everybody in the village, all the property owners, whether you live here or live elsewhere. You received a postcard and were asked to participate in our Survey Monkey-based survey, directing you how to go online and participate. At the end of that process, we had about a 12% response rate. We had just over 1,800 respondents. And if you assume that those were adults over the age of 18 and our population over the age of 18, we had about 12% response rate, which for us, I think is a reasonable but not ideal response rate. Results were mixed. And in some cases contradictory. These 3 questions and responses I posted on the screen are a good example of that. The top item on the upper left, 67% either strongly or somewhat agree with the statement, existing undeveloped farm and other agricultural land anywhere in the village should be allowed to develop, but only in a way that preserves the rural character. Now, the bottom left question, 54% strongly or somewhat agree with the statement, the village should protect all existing undeveloped farm and other agricultural land from future development. Third question, 47% strongly or somewhat agree with the statement, existing undeveloped farm and other agricultural land should be allowed to develop as the property owners choose. So the responses, again, are mixed and don't necessarily point us in a solid direction one way or the other. In part why we need more workshops like tonight to get some feedback and help us further clarify where people stand with regard to certain issues and topics. Our social pinpoint, our interactive mapping system, again, as I mentioned, allows you to place comments on a given location or about a particular feature. Some of the comments that we've received include, we need to maintain the farmland and larger single-family homes out here, no subdivisions on or smaller lots. People living out here chose this location to get away from the crowded housing subdivisions and don't want to be chased away from their homes by densely populated acreage. Another comment, the rural feel of our community is quickly disappearing. Another one, would like to see more areas being preserved. Germantown residents deserve quiet, peaceful neighborhoods. More of this should be put into the plan. No more industrial commercial. I like the preservation, but having 1 unit per 2.5 acre neighborhoods in the north would be good. Finally, a comment, Germantown needs to have more neighborhoods with medium-sized lots, 1 to 3 acres, less industrial, especially in the northern parts of the village. Keep the industrial south, open up more residential 1 to 3 acre lots. Again, this is just a handful of the comments that we pulled off of the Germantown 2050 website. I encourage you to go there and read the other comments. These were only comments pertaining to the rural preservation area, northern part of the village. The bulk of the comments, as you can see on the graphic, if you can make out the little graphic, is a map that you will see when you go to Germantown 2050. Each of those colored dots represents a comment or multiple comments. And if you click on one, you'll see the comment and you'll see how many likes, dislikes, things of that nature. It's very helpful and quite enlightening. So we're going to take a Mentimeter break at this point and ask a few informational but somewhat amusing questions about farmland protection. It might shed some light on a few trends and issues related to farmland protection that might help us better understand what the village and, quite frankly, all of southeastern Wisconsin is up against with respect to protecting and preserving both farmland and our rural landscape. So, Emily, why don't you lead the way?
Okay, our first trivia question. According to the American Farmland Trust, how many total acres of farmland is developed or converted to other non-farm uses each day in the United States? Right, so it looks like a majority think 2,000 acres per day. All right, oh, I'm sorry, 2,000. Yep. The number of farms in Wisconsin decreased 10% between 2011 and 2021. How many total farms were operating in Wisconsin in 2021? 10,000, 23,000, 47,000, 64,000, or 89,000?
Well, we're not going to wade into the weeds on that, but essentially somebody that declares that they made over $1,000 a year on farm products. So there's an actual standardized definition for that. But I think you get the gist of where we're headed. The correct answer is 64,100 farms, the yellow bar.
Wisconsin is considered to be America's dairy land, and Jeff says it has to be true since it's on the license plate. Which state led the nation in milk production in 2021? There was 13.8% of the total milk produced in the United States.
Well, we got a few homers, all right. All right, the correct answer is California.
All right. How many dairy farms, meaning milk cows, are currently operating in the village of Germantown?
All right, and the answer is 1. Yes, up on Cedar Lane.
Okay. And the last question, which of these goals is most important to you with respect to land in Germantown? Protecting farmland and agriculture, preserving open space and the rural landscape, maintaining and growing property values for property owners, or protecting the environment and natural wildlife habitat?
They're certainly all interrelated, but if you look closely, you can distinguish and identify what you feel is a priority. It's most important to you.
Okay,
There-
so
I'm sorry, I was just going to say there is no wrong answer, but certainly it looks like preserving open space and rural character for the long term is the most important to most of you in the room this evening. All right, at this point, I want to share some additional information about the different approaches that are used in the village's current 2020 plan versus the 2050 plan, or what's proposed in the 2050 plan. To start off with the matter of land use. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it tends to be the most important, or the most gets the most attention, sometimes the most controversial component of the plan. On the left is the 2020 plan map. It's a parcel-based reflection, if you will, of both existing land use and future land use, preferred land use for those undeveloped areas. That uses different colors to show the existing or preferred land use for each parcel. On the right is the 2050 proposed neighborhood district and corridor map, also referred to as the land use map. It's a place-based map showing the boundaries around those contiguous areas that we've identified as either a neighborhood or a district or a corridor that currently have or are intended to have by 2050 similar land use characteristics. In this case, the colors reflect the predominant land use for that particular neighborhood district or corridor. For example, the yellow area is assigned to those areas that are predominantly residential in land use and development, either existing or intended to be in the future. I should point out that the neighborhood district and corridor map really cannot be interpreted alone without a second component, what we call the land use matrix. It's another component that further defines and spells out what land uses would be allowed, what are desirable, what are allowed, and what are undesirable in a particular neighborhood, district, or corridor. For these reasons, the two maps really can't be compared side by side. If doing so is in an effort to point out any meaningful differences between the two, that really would be somewhat inaccurate and frankly unfair. There are two different approaches, and as we go forward, you'll understand why we're approaching the 2050 plan in a slightly different manner than the 2020 plan. The current plan for the area, the rural area, if you will, as you can see on the graphic, I circled two areas that are predominantly light green in color. Those are the areas that are classified as agricultural / conservation residential. The intention for the plan for these areas is to protect farmland and open space, allow agricultural compatible land uses only, prohibit urban infrastructure, essentially standing firm on the sewer service urban containment line, if you will. The policy in the map recognizes that certain farming trends are going to continue affecting the village, including the increasing pressure for non-farm development. And the approach also is intended to allow for large lot, low density residential non-farm development. The 5-acre rule, if you will, as it's commonly referred to, north of Freistadt Road, but really it applies to other areas in the village, including that smaller circled area on the southwest corner of the village, west of 41 and west of Lannon Road. And we'll talk a little bit more about the details of the current approach. The 2020 plan encourages the use of conservation subdivision design and plan development zoning to allow for smaller lots at the same density and private streets. And we'll get into some of those details shortly. The 2020 approach to the agricultural and conservation residential area, again, specifically allows agricultural land uses, crops, livestock, orchards, nursery, large scale and hobby farms, agribusiness and agritourism. It is specifically intended to prohibit or not allow non-farm industrial or retail commercial uses. Non-farm home-based businesses with certain restrictions are allowed, as are non-farm residential lots with certain restrictions. And there's one option, as I alluded to earlier, the density and lot size option, the 5-acre rule, essentially allows one lot with a minimum of 5 acres over a parcel to be developed with a density of one home site per 5 acres, essentially the 5-acre minimum lot size rule, as I mentioned. Now, the 2050 plan takes, again, a slightly different approach, the neighborhood district corridor concept. Under this concept, we divided the village into 32 contiguous areas. And between the map and the land use development matrix, we identify land uses that are allowed, desirable and undesirable throughout the village in those particular districts. The one district, the Rural Preservation District, is, as circled on the screen here, the large area in the north part of the village. This, like the 2020 plan in the ag conservation residential area, is intended to protect farmland and open space, protect our rural character and appearance, the rural landscape, if you will, allow ag compatible land uses, prohibit urban infrastructure, recognizes the continuing farming trends and pressure for non-farm development. And more so than a 2020 plan, it really is intended to address the balancing of the notion or the concept of rural preservation along with protecting private property rights and property values. The development policies that we're putting together recognize the current large lot, low density, the 5-acre rule for residential development is really not a good strategy in the long term. Under the 2050 plan approach versus the 2020 plan, under the 2050 plan, we're moving in the direction of requiring conservation subdivisions if dividing more than 5 lots in a large tract out in the rural preservation area, as opposed to it simply being an option under the current plan. I need to, I'm sorry, I'm going to continue forward. We'll get to a point where you can respond. The Rural Preservation District is being developed in part on the premise that the current 5-acre lot density policy is really not working as intended, or at least that it won't work over time if left in place. And also that the use of conservation subdivisions and the conservation design premise is a requirement. And I'm going to get into that in just a little bit. Like the 2020 district, the Rural Preservation District, land use wise, allows for agriculture, large scale and hobby farms, agribusiness and agritourism, no non-farm industrial, retail, commercial. Does allow non-farm home-based businesses with certain restrictions, and does allow non-farm residential development under 2 options versus the 1 under the current plan. And those 2 options include for any land division in the rural area that would create less than 5 lots or parcels. The basic allowance is 1 lot to be created for every 20 acres, 1 per 20 density, with a minimum 20-acre lot size. And the second option is for developments of 5 or more lots, typically a subdivision, where we would allow 1 lot per 5 acres, the 5-acre density, with a 1-acre minimum lot size, provided that the conservation design approach to laying out the development is followed, and that there's a minimum of 60% of the overall land area that's set aside in open space that would be owned in proportionate share by the individual lot owners in the development and or the homeowners association, or could even be deeded to a private or public conservancy organization. Along with that, there would be a requirement for a conservation easement on that open space, along with a stewardship plan that would guide the use and maintenance of those particular areas. Now, you might ask yourself, well, how did we come up with the 2050 Rural Preservation District boundary? I'm glad you asked that because it really falls back on some of the basic facts and realities of the village that effectively dictate the location and the extent of our rural preservation district. And it starts with, and frankly kind of ends with, the sanitary sewer service area for the village. And I'll define that term right now because I'm going to be using it as we go forward. This is an area that's served by the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District, an area that's designated in the village. It's also called or referred to as the urban service area or the urban boundary. It's a defined area served by public sewer and water and other urban services, either now or intended to be in the future, that will use and result in a cost-effective decision-making for the provision and extension of infrastructure, as well as land use and development decisions. The sewer service area is defined, determined by the village. It's approved by MMSD and other agencies to be those areas or that area that's suitable and capable for intensive and higher density land uses, given the proximity to transportation, our transportation system, and other existing urban services and development. This particular graphic does show in blue what the existing sewer service area is, approved by MMSD, and that area that that either is or could be served by the extension of facilities within the blue area. The orange areas highlight what we call potential sewer service areas, given the location of those existing facilities within the blue area that are capable of being extended into the orange areas to serve them, given both the capacity of the systems, the topography, and the characteristics of those particular areas. So what's left over by default or exclusion, if you will, the land area within the village that is not included in either the existing, the blue, or the potential, the orange sewer service area, is the area that we started with and have essentially assigned into the Rural Preservation District, with a couple of exceptions. As you look at the graphic, the first exception is on the far east side of the village. It's an area that is, quite frankly, it's nearly fully developed with unsewered residential lots, all in residential land use, generally ranging anywhere from as low as a ½ acre to 5 acres in lot area in that particular area. The second area of exception is right in the middle of the village. It's an area north of Freistadt Road, bisected by Fond du Lac Avenue, Highway 145, that is currently expected to be serviceable with public sewer and water that could be extended to the old Village Hall area, the Village Hall property, right at the corner of Division and Fond du Lac Avenue. At this point, it has the potential for becoming part of that potential sewer service area. And for that reason, at this point in the process, we have excluded it from the rural preservation area and have included it in 3 particular neighborhoods. Part of it's in what we refer to as the Dinesville neighborhood, another neighborhood, the Rockfield neighborhood, and also the Isabelle Farms neighborhood. And you can see that on this particular graphic, sort of in the elbow of the rural preservation area in the middle of the village. Now, I alluded to earlier the notion that the current 5-acre minimum, the 5-acre rule, if you will, really can't protect farmland and preserve rural character over time. And part of that is substantiated by the fact that both our projected population and housing needs through 2050 exceed approximately 2,100 homes by 2050. And this graphic, granted, it's a little general in nature, and a little conservative in its application, as we go through it. But you can get the gist for the fact that if we allowed all 2,100 home sites that are going to be projected to be needed by 2050 to develop in large low density residential like the 5-acre lots, that sort of policy is going to consume over 10,000 acres of land, which, as shown on the top box on the right-hand side of the graphic, is essentially the north half of the village. And as you move down on that chart on the right side, the smaller lot size you get, the less land it actually is consumed. So the second one, if the lot size serving that development was limited to 1 acre, then obviously 2,100 home sites would consume 2,100 acres, a dramatic reduction or difference in what could be consumed, if you will, by residential development if allowed, if the current low density, large lot, 5-acre rule is allowed to continue on as our primary development policy for the rural area in the village. A second reason that substantiates this particular position of staff is that the current, one of the current and probably the only 5-acre subdivision that's developed so far in the village, Isabelle Farms. As you can see on this graphic, it's interesting that when you drive through the neighborhood or you look at it from an aerial photograph, you can notice that the home area and approximately 2 acres around it is the area that is effectively used by the property owner for living purposes, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, with the balance of the property essentially being allowed to grow naturally for use by them privately for trails or their own personal enjoyment. But the idea is, again, that if we allow and perpetuate the current 5-acre policy, that the amount of land consumed will continue to increase and will continue to fracture our farmland areas, our open space areas, our environmental and habitat, wildlife habitat corridor areas. And so, again, for that reason, we're proposing a different approach. But before we talk a little bit about the conservation subdivision design and development, we want to get to our group mapping exercise. There's an amount of material left on your table. We'd like you to go through the process of defining what you feel would be the best boundary area, if you will, or the best rural preservation district for the village. And what we'd like you to do is use the materials that are on the table, and also your own personal knowledge and information, and share that with your neighbors, and use the materials to effectively draw out your own rural preservation district on the map. And Emily is going to walk you through that exercise right now. Essentially, the pressure for residential development that's not farm related, like our 5-acre large lot, low density residential development that is allowed to locate in the north part of the village. As I've got a couple of slides that will help with that, with the concept of that development pressure. It'll show you when we talk about conservation subdivisions as an alternative. I'm going to show you some slides that will support some of the facts and things we're experiencing with regard to the consumption of land for development. And that's essentially, non-farm development is subdivisions, commercial, industrial, anything that's not related to a farm. High density non-farm development is that industrial development, commercial development, and the low density is the large lots, single family development that's spread out in the areas in both the village of Germantown and throughout southeastern Wisconsin. So Emily, if you want to lead us through our mapping exercise. Predominantly cash crops. cropland, pasture land. There's some goats, there's horses, right. The question had to do particularly with dairy farms, following up on the America's Dairyland issue and how that's sort of not so much the truth anymore. We are with cheese. We're number one in cheese production. Pardon me? Yes, it's being used, and I don't prescribe to the concept that farmland is just a holding area for development, and that's why we're talking about how we can go about trying to best preserve that. At the same time, balancing private property rights as it relates to and the need for certain types and amounts of development. So with that said, I'd like to jump ahead into our mapping exercise. I also want to point out that as we do this, feel free to stand up, stretch, use the restrooms. There's water in the back if you need some water. We're trying to keep this as informal as possible, but as Emily pointed out, we're probably going to take the next 20 minutes or so to try and get through a mapping exercise at this point.
So the next 15 to 20 minutes we're going to use to discuss at your tables the proposed Rural Preservation District. The goal of the exercise is to work as a group to create a map that shows the boundaries of what your group would propose for the Rural Preservation District. On your tables, you should have a large aerial image of the village that shows the existing sewer service area and the potential service sewer area. You should have a current draft of the neighborhoods, districts, and corridors, or NDC map. And this shows the currently proposed Rural Preservation District boundary, a 2020 land use plan map, and an existing land use map that shows the existing sewer service area and the potential sewer service area as well. Also, use the information provided on the maps as well as your individual and collective knowledge of the village to determine your proposed Rural Preservation District boundary. If there's a couple of smaller tables, you might want to get together. More minds, the better. The first step will be to choose a spokesperson that will take notes for the group and is willing to summarize your group's discussion for everyone at the end. We may or may not get to everyone's table to present, but we'll try to get to as many as we can.
Yeah, and we'll ask for volunteers before we appoint tables to come forward.
Okay.
Just joking.
Next, using the red and green dots, which should be attached to your large map, you will identify the areas or properties that you would like to see removed from the rural preservation area using the red dots, or areas you would like to see added to the rural preservation area with green dots. You should number each dot and connect it with a written comment on the reasoning behind your selections. There's notepads on the table for you to do so. Finally, with the green marker, you'll draw the boundary around the areas to be included in your rural preservation district. If needed, you can hatch or do some other sort of pattern to help highlight the area. Keep in mind your rural preservation district does not need to be one contiguous area. You can identify multiple areas on the map if you'd like. There should be a couple of copies of the instructions on your table. The back side of this sheet provides category ideas for identifying specific policies your group feels are important or necessary to implement your designated rural preservation district. Make sure you work these ideas into your discussion. The goal here is to reach consensus, but make sure you take notes of any areas of difference or disagreement within your group. Again, if you need a break, go ahead and take one. There's water in the back, restrooms. I will let you know when we have about 5 minutes left for the discussion.
coming up, I'm going to ask John would be willing to. Well, yeah.
They can, I mean, just have them highlight the areas.
What at 85? Jump up. Oh, I can do it. I'm gonna ask. Oh. Okay, if you haven't drawn your lines and placed your dots, please take the next minute or two and wrap things up. As Emily asked at the beginning, and I think included in the instructions, we'd like to ask some groups to come forward and share what their decisions are and what their recommendations are. So as best you can, for those that are still working, if you can work and try and keep the noise level down while we continue to move forward and ask for those who are willing to share to come forward, and we'll do that in just about a minute. What we're going to have is one person from each table willing to be a spokesperson. Bring your map forward, put it on the easel that we have up front. We're putting it in a spot here where the WebEx folks can see on camera, see what the product is, at least in that way they can participate. I think we have a handful of people attending virtually. So with that said, is there any table that's willing to come forward, show us your map, and just give us a brief rundown on what went into your decision-making process, and maybe more importantly, share with us if there's some disagreement that you have at your table and what that is, so the rest of us can share and enjoy the punishment. Dean, you want to come forward first? Excellent. Is this working? Yes.
All right. When we were discussing the rural preservation, a lot of the discussion rolled around how do you want to, if you have a rural conservation, how many houses per acre do you feel is allowable? What's an acceptable type of a density? So there was a lot of discussion about that. But as you can see, we had a couple disagreements of red dot versus green dot, keep it in there or remove it. But what the consensus of the table became, and it's not that far off of what's already being proposed, but you can see everyone wants the corner. Everyone wants that northeast corner and keep it as rural as possible. Our table drew it straight down and just across the top of the development where we call it where the warehouses and light industrial are. And then they came down Goldendale Road and then across and then kind of bump up behind where you've got Isabelle Farms here, came in on an angle along, I think that's 145, up and over, and then kind of encircled this and removed this portion from that rural preservation, or actually from the sewer district, and included in rural preservation, and then we're back to where we began. So if you look at the picture you have on the actual proposed versus this, we basically cut a few corners away, but the way that it is as proposed is very similar. And part of the comments was some of these are neighborhoods that were built for rural neighborhoods. They were there for a long time. Let's keep them rural. That's why they built there when they did. Some of it's, a lot of this was kept in here because it's still lots of open farmland where people have crops on there. You might as well keep it within it. And also, we decided that anything that's from 145 up to the northeast, and that's just a demarcation line, as a suggestion, no industrial, no light warehousing ever. It's always going to be, if it's going to be any type of a development, it's going to be in the sense of a home, single family home conservation, but no industrial up here. And when you take 145 an angle and go all the way up to the corner. So those were the discussions that happened within our group.
Okay, I'm only up here because nobody else at my table would come up. So pardon me if I don't talk like a engineer or anything. Okay, we have people in our table who live in this area, and two here and two here, just so you know where we're from. What we decided upon, based upon some of the changes, is the Reds moved out of the area. So the reasons for that is this homeowner here doesn't want the added expense of sewer coming in to this area. This owner who's been here, and this owner is here 4 years, this owner has been here 30 years, wants to keep the rural character as rural. Doesn't feel the need. So red is staying in, correct? No, red's being removed. See, guys, you shouldn't have set me up here. We're removing, the red is removing from the rural preservation area. From this, and rural preservation, exact is what we're saying, right? I got one person from my table nodding. Okay, somebody else want to?
Yes, so by definition, the red dot, you're removing from the sewer service area and keeping it rural.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, are we right? Are we all together now, sir? Good at this. But no, okay, we're going to keep these areas, the green dots will be existing in the rural preservation, or as proposed, okay? Then the green line, okay, so we're going to move it out here to approximately where 145 comes in. Following 145, taking a short jog here and moving kind of to there. Almost essentially what the other table did here. Okay, sorry.
All right, excellent.
Trying my best.
Thank you very much. All right, do we have any other volunteers? Table number 10, is it? Table 10.
Thought I had it until I got up there.
All right, we had a lot of discrepancies in our map, so let's just avoid the red dots here. But right down here, we have a homeowner from the Falls area who would like to keep this in the rural preservation, correct? Okay, right, and Germantown area, there we go. Over here off of 145 Northwest, definitely hardcore rural preservation. Right here, we wouldn't mind seeing some sewers. Some people in the group disagree, but personally, it's because of the population discrepancies. We don't want a high-rise apartment building. We want ownership, if I'm not mistaken. So some type of smaller lot sizes, maybe not the 5-acre rule with the rural area, but we don't want to get rid of the rural feel, if that makes sense. And am I missing something that you guys want to say? Okay. Live-in ownership. Owner occupied condos maybe with some type of green space, common shared areas, but
Great, thank you very much. Table 10. Any other volunteers? Table 7?
Thanks. All right. We're at table 7. Most of us lived in the green area. Our green equals remain rural. We did draw some lines for where it goes. We don't want the water to be sold. We added, let's see, we added this little area back into the green preservation area because these industrial spaces came after these residents, and in the old map this was all green. So we want that back. If it has to be, we had a long discussion about what could go there if it does have to be developed. And it should, if it had to be developed, then some type of housing that's owner occupied, some industrial that's smaller than these giant things, that also have limited hours of operation so that there's no noise at night when people are trying to sleep. And also so that traffic is less. When it's a distribution center like they are now, there's constant traffic in and out from what the residents say who live around there. So that's something that should definitely be considered. Anywhere that industrial might be going in, which this apparently there, well, not here, there, and I can't remember where the rest of it was, down here. So that's definitely something that needs to be written into the priorities and the rules of the residents who are here first. The issue is the order in which things are developed. If the residents are there first, it's more of an impact than if the housing comes after the industrial is there, because if you choose to buy a house and the industrial is already there, that's part of your decision-making process. There should be buffers. There should be like a 200-foot wide forest that goes around any residential that's existing. That was one thing that some people liked. Yeah, owner-occupied housing. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. On the conservation, preservation, whatever, I can't remember the term, whatever it's called. We had a discussion about that, and we thought that the mechanism is too complicated to be effective. And there aren't any around here, which shows you that it is too complicated because people aren't doing it. It also goes against individual property rights and what people can do with their own property. If someone is able to sell their property, which is their right, somebody else should be able to do with their property what they want. Within reason, of course, unless you're industrial. So, I'm joking. The other thing is that we talked about that there needs to be more meetings. It feels like we're trying to stuff an awful lot of discussion into one meeting. And one of the thoughts that came out is that on those matrix for each, thank you, for each of the neighborhoods, the trustees should have meetings in each of the neighborhoods, and those matrices, I can't say it, thank you, matrices should be reviewed by residents and prior to any final preparation of the manual and the book. I don't know if that's happened yet. Did I get everything? Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Table 7. Anybody else? Table 3? Sorry, Table 9, we'll get to you shortly.
All right, so our chart, everyone at Table 3 lives in this area here. Red designates removal from the sewer service area. And then the green is the proposed rural preservation mapping area. Some of our reasoning and some of these reasons have been highlighted already. We truly do believe that we don't want to drive farmers out of the lands that they're currently occupying today. While we understand that there are few dairy farms, farming does take on other means and methods outside of the dairy industry. The other thing that was very important to us as well is the fact that we continue to believe in individual property rights and people having the ability to determine how to use their land and what what they'll use it for in terms of family legacy or in terms of preserving wildlife within their properties and having the ability, again, to just determine what they do with their own property. Conservation of country space, again, is kind of an underlining theme as well. There was the concern in some of these areas, right? Concerns as far as the cost and the implications of having to go through conversions where sewer conversion is concerned. And I think the other point, we've got a couple of other notes here about, 2050 housing projections. And really understanding that. I mean, and I don't know, I don't think any of us at the table have been in other planning sessions. But the exercise is a little difficult to do without maybe having some additional insight regarding some of the things we saw where density and lot size was concerned, right? Some of those planning assumptions and some of those projections, right? What is the thought and what is the direction for those lands that are outside the preservation area? And then the same thing with the projection as far as population and housing. The question was asked initially, where is the drive coming for that projection, right? What makes up that projection? Some of it certainly is going to be developers that are coming in and wanting to develop land. And we certainly understand that some of that is also expansion of the tax base. So the exercise in terms of, what's in, what's out, and drawing the border, might be a little different in terms of what the yield is, having an understanding of some of that other stuff regarding population and density and lot size. Did I miss anything? Tried to be quick.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right, table 3. Okay, table 9, come on forward. We'll take one more and then we'll try and move on.
All right, so when we look at ours, I would say that a significant part of the stuff that has potential sewer, we put back into rural preservation. When you get over here to Freistadt Road, we took that as the demarcation between rural preservation and not. But our personal opinion from almost everyone at the table was we need to keep more of these neighborhoods as farmland compared to this 2050 plan, which really puts in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different neighborhoods that are going to be full of houses. We don't see the need for it. And if there is a need for it, let's figure out a different spot to put them.
So any other tables? Tony, your table? Table 8.
Didn't really have a lot on the northern half of the village, the rural preservation area as it kind of is proposed today. I think that's, we thought those boundaries were pretty good. Where we did have some additional thoughts were really in terms of rural preservation, it's like, why should we have to drive to the northeast part of the village when we have some areas kind of in the southwestern part of the village, which are already kind of boxed in either by wetlands or an environmental corridor. And really you could take this area, I think it's along Lilac, Wetlands Nursery back here, which can't be developed anyhow. And we all know it because the highway goes right through it there. And that kind of works its way out to the west. We have some existing subdivisions here, but again, lots of farmland in between. Now we know some of that's designated for industrial development, but the concern is, especially when you go back 2 weeks ago with the proposed development on county line land, and the density of that is very high. So it could adversely affect some of those neighborhoods west, traffic, just the number and height of the properties and such, that again, some of the people lived in this area and they just didn't want to see that level of density coming down County Line Road. But I really think this thought here was kind of interesting because it's kind of within the village. So if we're going to have a kind of a rural feel, yeah, sure, it's rural out here, but at the same time, probably, a lot of us go through these areas every day, and you still kind of got that rural feel in areas that either can't be developed or not easily developed well. So that was kind of a different thought, I think, than some of other folks are going, other tables. Did I miss anything? Right. So really the red dots were more about not having sewer in those areas. Right, right. And there was an area here as well, again, where you could have some more rural preservation. Right, that's this piece here. And again, that was one of those areas that's kind of in the flux, maybe a little bit more on development. So kind of put back in the preservation area. What's the thoughts, Jeff?
Thanks, Tony. And table 8. Any other tables that we haven't had that want to come forward? All right, then I think we will jump into the next and final phase of our workshop. See if we can get the technology back functioning. All right, and I did hear table 3, and maybe some of this information that I'm providing now might have been a little more beneficial before the exercise. We kind of debated where to put it relative to the boundary exercise. So I apologize if this, but maybe this provides some clarity for you that we'll see where it goes after that. As we head into the home stretch here, I did promise you earlier that we're going to get into some of the details about conservation subdivisions and conservation design. First, I'm going to tie in some of the farmland protection facts and trends that we talked about or alluded to earlier in the workshop. The American Farmland Trust reports that 2,000 acres of farmland in the United States is lost for development or other non-farm purposes each day. From 2001 to 2016, 11 million acres of farmland in the U.S. was lost or fragmented, including 4.4 million nationally significant farmland acres. And the little map of Wisconsin on the far right there, the areas highlighted in green, those are the nationally significant farmland areas in the state of Wisconsin. 250,000 acres of Wisconsin farmland and open space, comprised of cropland, pasture land, woodland, was lost for development in that same period, 2001 to 2016. 96,000 acres to the higher intensity urban development, and 154,000 to low density residential development. What some people would refer to as the sprawl, the residential sprawl outside the urban areas, in communities that simply accommodate that large lot residential development. The graphics on the bottom show in sequence, in 5-year increments from left to right, areas that have lost acreage, farm acreage, to development. And so the darker the color, the more acres are lost. And we don't need to know the numbers necessarily to make the point, but I tried to highlight with a little yellow box the village of Germantown. And as you can see, in all 3 of those 5-year increments over the course of that 15-year time frame, the village of Germantown is right in the mix, right in the middle of the areas that are having the highest amount of conversion of farmland to non-farm or other development purposes. The number of Wisconsin farms has been declining. As we asked in the question session earlier, 10% has been lost from 2011 to 2021. The graphic just to the right shows that with the green line. The average farm size has been increasing, slowly but increasing, and as you can see on the solid red line moving upward, that's a reflection of consolidation into larger, some would use the term corporate farming, but it's consolidation of farms as the number of farms is decreasing, but the size is increasing. And another important point is that farmland protections, and I use the example of zoning, is contracting. Some would use the term disappearing. The map on the left, the lower left, shows municipalities in southeastern Wisconsin with adopted farmland protection zoning regulations that have been approved under the Wisconsin Farmland Preservation Program and the Working Lands Initiative. The boxes, the town areas or villages in white, they are not participating at all, and they don't have farmland protection zoning. And as you can see, the red box there is the village of Germantown. Again, right in the middle of the Washington County, Milwaukee County, Waukesha County area that really has been moving away from adopting farmland protections. And I'm not going to go down a long path, but we were faced with that decision in about 2011 when Washington County came to us and asked us about our farmland protection zoning and whether we wanted to participate through the county and ultimately with under the state's program. And they help us draw the graphic that's on the far right, which the orange areas show areas in the village, land deemed eligible for farmland preservation zoning under the Washington County Farmland Preservation Plan and their scheme, if you will, for determining what's good farmland worthy of preservation versus that isn't. And you can generally see that this area in the sewer service area, the south half of the village, is not been deemed suitable for farming purposes. And in part, some of that has to do with being contiguous, part of a contiguous area, because there certainly are pockets in the southwest part of the village that could be continued to be used for farming purposes. The middle graphic shows municipalities in Washington County with approved farmland protection zoning regulations. So the county put a map together for every municipality, much like they did for Germantown. And as you can see, if you can see, there's only 3 communities, the town of Hartford, the town of Barton, and the town of Germantown, as small as it is, that are participating through the county program for farmland protection and preservation, and ultimately are eligible for certain grant and tax crediting programs from the state. So again, farmland protections, while they might have existed in years past, have been diminishing, contracting, and moving away from the southeastern Wisconsin area, including the village of Germantown. And lastly, this graphic is intended to show that it uses information from 2019 and 2018, a disparity in land value measured by property sales for farmland that's sold for development, where the average price per acre, this is across the state of Wisconsin, was $14,780 per acre. It was 180% higher than land that's sold for continued use in agricultural practices, where that sold for an average price of $5,280. So if you had farmland and you were in a position of needing to sell, what are you going to sell it for? For more farming purposes to an adjoining farmer? Or are you going to take advantage of what, if any, opportunity there is to sell for something other than farm agricultural use? Sell it for development. This graphic sort of shows that you can basically sell your land for more dollar if you're selling it for development purposes than for continued agricultural purposes. And certainly this information represents a state average. It varies by location. And one might guess that the values are higher near the urban fringe areas around Madison and Milwaukee, like the village of Germantown and southeastern part of the Washington County. Now, with that said, and we alluded to this earlier, one of the recommended strategies for transitioning communities like the village of Germantown is the use of conservation subdivision design, conservation design. And we're not going to dig too deep into the weeds on this, but I do want to talk a little bit about that and show you some examples. As I mentioned, it's a commonly used strategy in southeastern Wisconsin as an alternative to a sort of the conventional subdivision development approach, where a given property is divided into lots and roads. Every inch of the property is either in one of those. It's either in right of way or it's in a lot. Where the conservation subdivision approach starts with a process of identifying land that's worthy of preservation, not just floodplains and wetlands and woodlots, but vistas or other features, view sheds that may be important or I don't say critical, but are reflective of the rural landscape in the village of Germantown. You may be driving down a road and go over a particular hill and you see a particular area, and that to you is the village of Germantown, the rural landscape that we really want to try and preserve and protect. The conservation subdivision approach moves us in that direction of at least designing potential development with that in mind versus the conventional subdivision approach as shown on the left. Conservation subdivision design, the goals are intended to preserve the rural landscape, natural resource areas, farmland, and other large open spaces, balanced with the protection of property rights by allowing non-farm residential development at rural densities at whatever the underlying zoning or allowance is for the particular community. Benefits, and these aren't a complete list, but other benefits of the conservation subdivision design approach: less fragmentation and loss of environmental corridors and wildlife habitat, appreciation of value. There have been studies shown in other places of the country where neighborhood open space amenities add to the value of a neighborhood and to individual properties. It can be used in the sales and marketing. Owners prefer to be adjacent to protected open space. I lived in the state of Florida for a long time, and one of the things I found very interesting is, as many golf communities as there are, most of the people in most of those golf communities are not golfers. They're not there to golf. They're there to take advantage of the protected open space areas that they can look at and appreciate. Lower development and maintenance costs. If we're not needing to serve lots throughout an entire parcel of land, we're building less roads. It's lower cost up front and lower maintenance costs at the back end. Increased social and recreational opportunities. Open space amenities can do that. I was discussing with one table the notion that if we have one conservation subdivision next to another, the idea that you can provide for an interconnected trail system that ultimately connects to a public trail system just makes a lot of sense and adds value, not only just value to those neighborhoods or subdivisions, but it has a social and a recreational opportunity and benefit as well. And it also can, in some ways, reduce the demand for public open space and parkland. Typical conservation subdivision design approach. You start with a parcel of land. In some cases, it's a minimum property of 20, 25, 30 acres in size. There's a minimum requirement for open space that's to be set aside as permanent open space. Some cases it ranges from 25 to 60%. And it does depend on whether it's in a rural area or in an urban area. And you can do this, you can take this approach in both. We're talking about it principally for rural preservation, but as I'll show in a minute, it can be done effectively in an urban area that is served by sewer and water. Conservation subdivisions are density neutral in that when we look at this graphic, I'm just guessing that on the left, these are all 5-acre lots and there's 30 of them. On the right, these are all 1-acre lots, but there's 30 of them. So it's density neutral in the sense that you get the same number of home sites per area. It's just that, as you can see, you're preserving and protecting open space, and it's not necessarily part of one individual's backyard that can't be used by anybody else if use of the open space is an approach that the community wants to follow. And not a one-size-fits-all. There are basic requirements and allowances. They vary by community and location. And the three things, the items that Table 3 had mentioned, if I knew more about the density, the lot size, and the open space percentage, that might help me decide on defining the rural preservation area. You're right. And let me just point out communities in our area that use this approach. The city of Mequon to our east, they provide for conservation subdivision design in their R1 and I believe some planned development districts under their zoning code. Their basic development parameters include you start with a minimum 25-acre parcel size in order to develop a conservation subdivision approach. The density allowance, 1 lot per 5 acres. The minimum lot size, a minimum of 3/4 of an acre of a lot. In the city of Mequon, the requirement is a 60% minimum open space requirement, where that open space is either owned by the homeowners association, owned in proportionate share by the individual lot owners, property owners, or it can be dedicated with a conservation easement to a public conservancy or private conservancy agency. There is a requirement for a conservation easement and a stewardship plan to address the issue of maintenance and that sort of thing going forward. Examples, and this is just a short list, Cobblestone Woods off of Highland, that's the one shown in the picture here, Hawks Glen off of Highland Road, Ashbury Woods off of Mequon Road, and Sutton Ridge off of Mequon Road. Moving on, the village of Richfield to our west, they do allow for conservation subdivisions in a couple of their zoning districts. Their basic parameters are start with a minimum 20-acre parcel size. They require or allow 1 lot per 3-acre density. The minimum lot size is 1 1/4 acres or 1 1/2, depending upon which zoning district you're in. Their open space requirement is a minimum 40%, similar to Mequon, owned by homeowners association, private ownership, or public conservancy ownership. They also require deed restrictions over the open space areas with a maintenance plan. Examples in the village of Richfield, and there are many, Hawks Nest on Hillside Road, as shown in the picture, Winchester Fields off of Elmwood Road, Timberstone off of Hubertus Road, and Prairie Hollow off of Mayfield Road. So within a short driving distance, pick your direction, you can go and see other communities that have utilized this concept as an effort to deal with the pressure for non-farm development in their communities while trying to balance property rights. And finally, the village of Germantown. Who knew? We have a conservation subdivision here in the village of Germantown. It was developed in the early, late 1990s, early 2000s. I was not here at the time. In the case of the village of Germantown, we only allow it as an option, and you need to use the planned development district. The density would vary or be dictated by the underlying zoning. There's no minimum lot size, there's no minimum open space requirement, but there is a requirement for deed restriction and open space. In this case, this is our, I don't want to say our only, because the treetops and some others have developed in a similar concept. I'm using this as one example. Prairie Glen off of Wasaki Road, as shown in the photo there, along with the concept plan for phase 1. There is a north half, a second phase, if you will. The south half, 39 acres developed with 31 lots, which is a density of 1 lot per 1 1/4 acres. They have a minimum 60% open space set aside as part of that development. The minimum lot size is 15,000 square feet, and the village received a commendation from the governor at the time, McCallum, in 2001, for us embracing this concept and encouraging and allowing this kind of development in the village. So there are examples of conservation subdivisions and the design concepts embodied in those in areas around us, and they are quite successful. Depending upon how you define success, you can go to the Mequon, you can go to Richfield. Yes, they are large, not to say large, they're generally expensive homes in areas that have increased in their value. Some of them have homeowners associations that are quite active. They organize activities. They are working on developing trails, and there are others that are just more passive. But there are examples out there, and it is the concept that staff is looking to continue to push for, if you will, for inclusion in our plan and in our zoning regulations as we move forward. Not as an option. It certainly will be an option in some cases, but we're really moving in the direction of making it a requirement for development in the rural preservation area. Again, I don't have a slide, but as I mentioned earlier, what we're pushing for or proposing is if you're developing less than 5 lots in the rural preservation area, the minimum lot size is 20 acres. That's what it used to be many, many years ago before the current 5-acre policy was enacted as part of the 2020 plan. If you're willing to work with the village, lay out a subdivision in a way, even though you don't have to split off all 4 or 5 lots, 6 lots, 10 lots, whatever it is that you're eligible for, you don't have to do all of them right away. You can do one at a time, but put together a plan with us, create a planned development district that we'll hold you to as the development occurs, that we can predetermine where the open space is and how it's going to be set aside and dealt with, how the trees can be planted and that sort of thing. That's what we're proposing and advocating as part of the 2050 plan. So with that, our last Mentimeter activity before we move on for the evening deals with conservation design, and Emily is going to get us back into the Mentimeter mode for the next few minutes.
If your phone is showing an error, you might just need to refresh your browser. Okay? Okay, in the village's rural preservation district discussed tonight, how much open space should be required in a conservation design development in order to preserve the rural landscape? Less than 15%, 15 to 30, 31 to 45%, 46 to 60%, or more than 60%. Okay, so we have some support for the higher percentages. Okay, within the rural preservation district, what should the minimum lot size required in a conservation design development be? We have less than an acre, 1 to 2 acres, 2 to 3 acres, 3 to 4 acres, or 4 to 5 acres. Great. A majority of the support is for 1 to 2 acres. Similar 4 to 5 acres is a similar number. Within the rural preservation district, what should the maximum density or the average number of homes per acre be in a conservation design development? 1 home per 2 acres, 1 home per 3 acres, 1 home per 4 acres, 1 home per 5 acres, or jumping up to 1 home per 10 acres. Okay. So in this question, you live in the rural preservation district. Your neighbor just sold off 40 acres of land for residential development. Which design would you prefer to see next door? The rural large lot subdivision or the conservation subdivision?
Oh, we left out a choice.
Okay. In the rural preservation district, if a development does not use a conservation subdivision design, what minimum lot size should be required? 3 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres, 20 acres, or 35 acres? Next question. For as long as you have lived or owned property in Germantown, how successful has Germantown been at preserving the rural landscape? Very successful, somewhat successful, nothing has changed, somewhat unsuccessful, or very unsuccessful. All right. And then after participating in tonight's workshop, we wanted to do this one more time. Now, what do you think of when you hear rural preservation? If your words are still the same, that's great. But if your words are different, go ahead and change those from what you put last time.
It's yours. Right. All right. Thank you for participating in that. Just a couple more minutes here. We're going to get our slide back online. All right. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight and participating. I really do appreciate all the feedback that you provided. I'm hopeful that was good conversation at the tables, and hopefully we'll get some reporting back on some of that conversation as we go forward. I really do appreciate the comments that were made as part of the boundary exercise. I thought that was excellent, and we'll be going back over it. The meeting is being recorded. I think it'll be posted on the YouTube channel, so we'll all have access to the comments that were made and be able to go back and check on the things that have been said in case we missed anything or misinterpreted what might have been said. We're going to keep the maps, the exercises. I understand there was a little confusion on the dots and how they're to be used, but I think we can go back and look at the tape and get a right idea of what you were explaining and what your thoughts were going forward. With that said, I'd like to ask Dean Welter to come forward and just make a few comments as we wrap up. Before I do that, I just want to simply point out that you can provide additional feedback and comments in multiple ways. The Germantown 2050 Community Engagement website. I, again, encourage you to go there, use the interactive mapping tool. You can visit the germantown.gov website, and you can simply send us an email, comments at germantownwi.gov, our email address for the general email process. You can leave anybody fill out the hard copy questionnaire, we'd ask you to drop it in the comment box on your way out the door, and then any comments that you provided in writing on the sheet that was left on the table, you can drop it off tonight, or you can take it with you and drop it off at Village Hall anytime in the near future. We certainly would appreciate that. So thank you.
I'd just like to thank everybody for coming. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your input. Please keep notice for other future meetings. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors that we want the participation. We want the feedback. We want to work together with you to plan for what Germantown's future is, for what land uses you'd like to see in different areas, and make sure that it not only works well for you and what your vision is, but works well for the future residents that come here and that want to live here for that reason. So again, thank you all and have a good night. If you want to talk to anybody else about this besides what we've given you for information to reach out to, you can always go to your trustees. You can always send me emails, call me. We try to respond as quickly as we can, but please feel free if you have questions or comments or would just like to discuss it further, please reach out. Talk to you all soon. Thank you once again for coming. Good night.